So hello again everyone, and welcome to another video here from Mad About Madeira. I'm actually doing a video on a weekend. It's relatively early here. Again, I generally do these videos from work. I'm about to clean the car, so dressed rather casual right now, not in my work uniform. But I decided I was going to go ahead and do another video. Thought that crossed my mind, and as you know, as the thoughts cross my mind, I do the videos. Well, today's video has to do with going back over something that I had brushed on in one of the earlier videos that I did. And that is, now, I cannot speak, I guess you can say, authoritatively on this. So this is going to be a subjective opinion because I can only speak about my experience, which obviously is not everyone's experience. But the thing about it, I was reading an article the other day, and I was rather fascinated by this. Even though I knew this, but it just sunk in a little bit more. And that is the idea that Madeirans who traveled to the Caribbean. Now, a lot of Madeirans went to other places, obviously, to Hawaii, South Africa, Australia. They went to other places. But of course, because I am from the Caribbean, I've always been fascinated by them being in the Caribbean. Now, what is so funny is that as a little boy growing up on the island of St. Kitts in the Caribbean, I had no clue and no idea that all around me or nearby me was the Madeiran influence or presence. It's only now that I'm a grown man, learning about my own family history, am I realizing how somewhat ubiquitous the presence was. I just did not know. You know, I'm here growing up on an island in the Caribbean, and the general thought is the people who are around me, I mean, from what I can see, they're black folks. I get a little bit older, I understand that these black folks are on these islands because they're descendants of formerly enslaved Africans or enslaved Africans from in the past. Now, granted, I grew up, you saw a few white folks here and there, and you figured that they were Americans visiting the island to work, or you figured they were, in those days at least, when St. Kitts was still under the British flag, you figured that these were folks from England, officials, perhaps visitors, perhaps some few people who may have had some family who were born on the island when it was still under the British flag, and they may have been visiting or coming back home to see different things with their heritage. No one could have told me when I was growing up. I mean, I was a little boy, so I was still learning about the world, learning geography. But even when I got older into my teens, no one could have told me that some of the people that I saw growing up that were white, that were much fairer, that these people were actually Portuguese and people of Portuguese descent. Because there is no way in my mind when I was an 18-year-old or even a 21-year-old who would have associated Portugal with St. Kitts or Portugal with just anywhere in the Caribbean. I would have never thought that. Because as I grew up and started to learn about the world around me, and I became very fascinated by geography and history, because for me the two go hand in hand, you know, I would have looked around and said, well, yeah, I could see this person over here being of British descent. You know, I could see this person over here being of Irish descent or Scottish descent. Because back in the days of slavery, and especially here in the British Caribbean, at the time, St. Kitts being one of them, you know, you figured there was a British presence because that was an island that was colonized by the British. The British hired a lot of Irish men and Scottish men to operate as foremans or foremen on their plantation system. So I could understand that group of people. Sure enough, when I did my DNA, there is a strong British, think Irish presence showing up in my DNA. So that's not surprising, because I can go back and I can look and I can say, well, yeah, the British were here. They colonized this island for a few hundred years. They brought in enslaved Africans. They hired people from other parts of their kingdom, Ireland and, the Scots, and brought them in as foremen to work on their plantations. So I could understand all of that. But if you threw in the Portuguese, I'm like, Portugal? Where do they fit into this? Because again, as I began to learn about history and how the world worked back then, I realized that the Portuguese only came to one place on this side of the world, on the western side of the Atlantic, and that was Brazil. And I'm looking around like, well, Brazil is like 1,000 miles south of this place, or, quite a few miles south of the Caribbean. Well, I shouldn't say of the Caribbean, but from St. Kitts, but, So I'm like, and I never heard about some mass immigration of Portuguese leaving Brazil and traveling to the Caribbean. So again, in my mind, I'm like, Portugal and the Caribbean just they don't seem to be in the same sentence. So this is why when I was growing up, I think when I was in my teens, one of my uncles, that's on my father's side, my father's brother, he was speaking about his mother, my father's mother, who is my grandmother and who raised me on the island of St. Kitts. And he made a comment in passing, and oh, heaven knows I wish he was still alive today. Because I'm kicking myself, because as I was growing up not knowing any of this, and then when I start finding out, the people who had that information have all passed, including this uncle. But he made a comment and he said, Dexter, that's my name, by the way. He said, do you know that Mama, referring to his mother, referring to my grandmother, that her people came from Portugal? He said that to me, and I still can remember it to this very day. But when he said it to me, it never resonated. It never really stuck to say, let me go and investigate. It never really caught my attention. When he said it was just like, okay. Just never really triggered anything at the time, So years go by. And then a first cousin of that same uncle, of my father, was the first person in 2008 in a little correspondence we were having. And this is a man, my father's first cousin, I never knew existed. And he didn't know that I existed. As a matter of fact, him and my father never met. They don't even know each other. But, and that's another story, but he was the first person to mention to me after my grandmother died, and I realized I knew really nothing about her. I knew nothing about her past. I knew nothing about her heritage. But I became curious when she passed away, like, okay, she's gone now. Who was she? Where did she come from? And this first cousin was the first person to mention anything about a connection to his aunt, my great-grandmother, and an island known as Madeira. And I was like, Madeira. Then I realized that it was Portugal. But as I grew up and I started to learn more about this, a lot of people would not say in the Caribbean, oh, this person came from Madeira, or they won't specify. They would just say Portuguese, or in some places they say Portuguese. In Guyana, in St. Kitts, they say Portuguese. Oh, he's a Portuguese. They won't say he's a Madeiran. So that was another thing. To specify the place in Portugal that they came from was also fascinating to me. So as I mentioned in another video, Initially, when I heard about Madeira, I thought about Madeira. I thought it was a province on mainland Portugal. And I am a geography nerd, which is really odd, which I mentioned before, that I knew about the Canary Islands. I knew about Cape Verde or Cabo Verde. I heard about the Azores. I knew about those places. But Madeira, interestingly enough, was the one place I had never heard of. And maybe I did hear about it somewhere in my past. But again, it never stuck to the membrane up here to kind of like identify where it was in the world, even though I pretty much can tell you where just any country in the world is to this very day. Madeira, just never really heard about it. But yet, it, as I came to understand or came to know, it features prominently in my family history on both sides, on my mother and my father's side. That's me. Now, as I began to learn, after I found all this out, and I began to learn more about Madeira, it became fascinating to me that it wasn't like one or two Madeirans came to the Caribbean, the British Caribbean especially, Guyana, Trinidad, St. Vincent, St. Kitts, Nevis, Antigua. It wasn't like one or two. It wasn't even a couple hundreds. It wasn't even 1,000. There were multiple thousands of Madeirans who came to the Caribbean. I think in places like Guyana alone, or British Guyana as it was known back then, there was like about 30,000 of them. Trinidad, perhaps another somewhere in that vicinity. And then the others dispersed to the other smaller islands in the Caribbean. I don't have these numbers correct. I'm just thinking off the top of my head. But it seems to me that between 1835, after the British ended slavery in their kingdom, and of course, obviously, in the empire, and obviously that included the British Caribbean, between 1835 and 1900, there were probably at least 100,000 Madeirans who came to the Caribbean. In the scheme of things, that's a small number. But in the Caribbean, considering their populations, that's a very large number. And to make things even more fascinating, back in those days, the population of Madeira was probably about 100,000. I guess you can say like over that period of time. And in one particular year, you may have said the population of Madeira is 100,000, but yet 30,000 of those people left and went to other places. And a good chunk of them ended up in the Caribbean, because that's where the British had their plantation systems. That's where they really needed workers to go to, because when they ended slavery, the enslaved Africans were like, we're out of here. Some, of course, stayed around, but it was like, we're out of here. This back-breaking plantation system where we suffered the horrors of slavery, we're out of here. That place is traumatic. And to fill that labor vacuum, they brought in the Portuguese initially. They were later followed by the East Indians in places like Trinidad and Guyana and Jamaica and a few other places. But the initial experiment was with the Madeirans and Azorians to a lesser degree. And they brought them in. The other thing is that I found out is that sometimes a Madeiran would board a boat on this contract, and it may say you're going to Cabo Verde to work there, or you might be going to, I don't know, South America. And then the ship will end up taking them to Demerara in South America, which is British Guyana or Guyana today. The illiteracy at the time was rather high on a place like Madeira, because I think when some people here, especially people on this side of the world, who I get into it sometimes when it comes down to all the history of Portugal and slavery and so on, I tell them that technically speaking, even though Madeira is an an autonomous area of Portugal today, remember, it was also a colony of Portugal. A colony just like Brazil was, or a colony just like St. Kitts was to the British, or Trinidad was to the British. It was a colony. It was an island that was exploited for the benefit of the home country, the mainland, right? It was. So if you look at it that way, the people who were living there, while they may have gotten some kickback benefits from the prosperity of the mother country, homeland, Portugal, they were also an island out there in the middle of the ocean that was exploited. So the people who were there during the 1800s and prior, a lot of them were, they worked in agriculture, growing grapes and, for vineyards and farming. And a lot of times these farmers living out in the middle of wherever, because the island is, today, without all the connections we have with the tunnels and the roads back in those days, is a very jagged, raggedy island. And because it is, I meant to say rugged, sorry, not raggedy. And because it is, getting from one place to the next was rather difficult. So a lot of people grew up there or were born there who really had no education. Of course, today that's an entirely different thing, because the island is highly educated. But back in those days, poor. When the famines came through, the people were very poor, destitute, desperate, illiterate, had no other industry to work in, unless you jumped out in the ocean and worked in catching fish. So when these people came to the Caribbean, they weren't coming down as entitled white people, or coming down as entitled whatever. Initially, of course, when they came through, as always happens with humans, there's suspicions on both sides. People keep to themselves. And I've always said the Madeirans were in a very odd situation, because the British, believe it or not, looked at them as like little peasants beneath them, workers. So the white British who were living in these places were like, they're beneath us. They're not like us. They're not cultured like us. And then the local black population looked at them and like, well, they're white like those British people, so we need to keep an eye on them because we don't know what they're up to. So the Madeirans were they were not this, but they were not that, and they were somewhere kind of in the middle, somewhere there. I always think of them like teenagers. They're not like old enough to be considered adults, but they're not young enough to still be considered children, and you're somewhere in the middle, and it's like you don't know what you really are. Am I still a child? Am I an adult? If I act like this, they're going to tell me stop acting like a child. If I act like this, they're going to tell me know your place, you're still a child. So it gets a little weird. But I've always looked at them in a similar situation. So when they came through, this was the situation that they were basically in. Poor, destitute, a lot of them illiterate. And they're on this island where the people are speaking English primarily and speaking an entirely different language. Can't really communicate. And I shouldn't say they can't really communicate, because I something I didn't consider. I should mention the fact that the British had been coming to Madeira for hundreds of years. So I guess those people who may have come from the areas of Funchal, where the British would have pulled up on their boats and everything, they may have known a few English words here and there, or probably knew how to speak some English, because they catered to the British. But for the folks that came from the rural areas, that you still have today, that you'll find a lot of people in Funchal and maybe the larger areas in and around, on the surrounding areas, who may be able to speak English and understand English. But if you go out into the countrysides, you may find it a little bit more difficult to communicate, because a lot of them may know a few words, but Portuguese would be their dominant tongue out there, right? But now just think about all these people coming over, and they may know a few English words. But then you're coming to the Caribbean, where the African or the black population is speaking the language, the English language, in a different way from how the British sound. So for example, a British person may say, "Top of the morning to you, sir." They may speak like that. But a person from St. Kitts would say, hey, good morning, my son, how you doing? You know, well, I wouldn't say my son. That's a Virgin Islands thing. I can't even speak like a person from St. Kitts anymore. But they would say something in a different way. It's English that they're speaking, so I can imagine these Madeirans sitting there like, "What did he just say?" you know. Or when the Madeirans speak, the local black person there in St. Kitts is like, "What in the world did he just say?" So I could imagine there was a communication barrier, and then you had the whole thing about separation. You know, well, they're that color, they're this color, and I could just imagine all the crazy things that went on back then. And I say all of that to say this: when I look around, again, this is where the subjective part comes in. I don't look around in St. Kitts and Nevis and see the Portuguese presence. You see the names. It's like it lurks in the shadow. You see names like Da Costa, De Freitas, Gouveia. You know, you may see names like that just there, floating around in the in it, just around. But you won't really think much about it otherwise. You know, it's just there. But yet, when I speak to some of the older people, sorry about that, you will hear them um, talking, or if I bring up Portugal, you know, I'm say, oh yeah, we had the Portuguese them, yeah, the white people them in Caon, or the white people them in whatever, and oh yes, yeah, we remember them, and like what? Wait. So you guys are aware that there were Portuguese? Like, yeah, they were around. They were here. They were the light-skinned people or the white people, and they own stores and they own shops. But it's like, while they know that, the 80-year-olds, the 70-year-olds, while they know that, the younger generation are like, what Portuguese? Don't know anything about them. So it's like a disconnect with the information that was passed down. And I always just thought it really fascinating and interesting. But yet, if you have 100,000 people coming to the Caribbean from Madeira, from in Portugal, you must know those 100,000 people. I forgot how the statistics go, but like for every 500 people, from them they'll produce half that number ahead of them. Like, in other words, if there's 500 people, they'll produce a new generation of 1,000 people. So if there's 1,000 people, they'll produce a generation of 3,000 people, you know, and so on. So just imagine 100,000 people, men and women, coming from Madeira, coming to the Caribbean. Just imagine the legacy they left behind in terms of their posterity. Now, granted, in some places, a lot of Portuguese people did pick up and leave for better opportunities in other places. So their presence may not have been as, their presence may have been there at one point, and then they picked up and they left and they went to other places. Places like Guyana I can think of. But there was still a significant amount that were left behind to be recognizable, to be noticeable, to know that there's a Portuguese community in this particular place. But yet when I look around, I'm like, these people came down, they made their contributions, they put down their roots, they put down their names, and yet when I look around, there's information, but not a lot. For example, in St. Kitts, we know that Madeirans went to St. Kitts. We know that Madeirans ended up on St. Kitts and Nevis. But yet, if you go to the Portuguese site that everyone goes to, I think it's ABM something. But if you go there, it's going to show you in the drop-down arrow the list of places that Madeirans travel to. But when you click on St. Kitts, it's going to tell you 0 results. But yet we know that in 1856, a ship went to St. Kitts called the Basque Nautilus. It went to St. Kitts with 58 Madeirans aboard. The ship landed safely. I think it was captained by the name of Henry Laws. And it showed up in St. Kitts. And it has a list of all the passengers, their names and everything. But yet, if you go to the ABM site and you click on St. Kitts as a destination for these Madeirans, you're going to see nothing. If you click on Barbados, where others went, you're going to see nothing. I think if you click on St. Vincent, you're going to see nothing. I think if you click on Demerara or British Guyana or Guyana today, I think you do see people there. I think you may also see Trinidad. But yet they ended up on those islands, but they're not listed. Now, whether or not it was they all left Madeira and they went to a place like Demerara or Trinidad, and that is all the records show. And then when they arrived in Demerara, Guyana, and Trinidad, and other places where they might show listed in the Caribbean, they then moved to other islands. Perhaps the Portuguese record is not concerned about their secondary voyages, wherever they ended up, just their primary voyage. So, for example, when I am looking for my ancestors, I'm looking for them leaving Madeira and going straight to St. Kitts. And I can't find them. But they may be on a record that left Madeira and went to Brazil or Demerara, and then from there took a secondary voyage and went somewhere else and ended up in places like St. Kitts or Nevis. So I'm here looking for them, but when I look, I'm probably looking at their names but not realizing that they went to Brazil first or they went to Demerara. So it becomes a little difficult. But at the end of the day, I look back and I don't know, maybe I may be the person. I know, for example, Miss Ferreira, I forgot her for Joanne Ferreira. I know she has done extensive work. She's from Trinidad, and I know she has done extensive work speaking about the Portuguese leaving, well, the Madeirans or Portuguese leaving Madeira and coming to places like Trinidad. And she's mentioned about St. Vincent and a few other places. She's done great work. You find a lot of literature from her online. So when you're looking up Madeirans in the Caribbean, you're most likely going to see her name associated with it. But other documentation, you don't really find much of anything else anywhere else. So I would love to go, and as a matter of fact, I'm planning to go to St. Kitts and Nevis in December. Hope I can make it, because when I get down there and I touch down, equipped with all this information that I know now, and having all this curiosity, because this is going to be the first time I am going back to those islands since I've found out so much about the Madeiran side of my family, that I want to go back and I want to go to cemeteries. I want to look at tombstones. I want to interview older people in their 80s, their 90s, who may still be around, who would remember my great-grandfather. They probably won't remember my great-great-grandmother, obviously, because I don't know when she passed away, but I want to say she passed away perhaps in the early 1900s. But I want to interview those people, meet those people, talk to those people, discuss things with those people, and try to piece together and try to go back to find out and get an idea of who my great-grandfather was, because again, he was the son of a woman from Madeira. I want to find out more about all of this. And perhaps I can put the information I get together and try to recreate some sort of history of the Madeirans in St. Kitts and Nevis. And by extension, to learn more about myself and find out more about my Madeiran family that came to the Caribbean. Okay? There's a lot more I had to say, but I got distracted because I saw that my daughter called me. She's in the military. I saw that she called me, and I have to go check on what's going on. I think she is currently traveling across the Caribbean Sea on a ship because she's in the Navy. So I got a little distracted by that. My thought kind of got thrown off, so please forgive me if I seem distracted. But for this little video right now, I'm sure there's more that I could have said, but my thought just got blown up. So sorry about that. But I can't believe I'm actually keeping a video under 30 minutes. So let me go ahead and end this video, and I just want to thank you for viewing. Share your thoughts, please. Okay, I would greatly appreciate that. You can share this video, and you can also like. So until the next video, thank you so much for tuning in to Mad About Madeira. I'll talk to you guys later, okay? Bye.